Watermelon sugar.
In 2015, 35-year-old Michelle Blair was living in Detroit with her 4 children. She was struggling to keep a job, and eventually she was evicted from her apartment. March 24th of 2015, she was served with an eviction notice, but she was not there. So a crew went inside of the home and began removing furniture. As the crew begins removing furniture, they find a frozen body inside of a white deep freezer. Once police arrive, they make another discovery and find a body of a boy underneath the body of the girl in the freezer. Police find Michelle at another neighbor's home with her other 2 children, aged 8 and 17. But her other 2 children, 9-year-old Steven and 13-year-old Stoney, were missing. After some brief questioning, Michelle is taken into custody. As she is being taken away, she says, "I'm sorry." Police take the frozen bodies to the morgue to thaw out so an autopsy can be performed. When the autopsy is performed, they do confirm that it is her 2 children, Steven and Stoney. The autopsy determines that the cause of death is homicide and that the bodies had been in the freezer for at least a couple years. Michelle immediately confesses to the police that she did murder the 2 children for sexually assaulting her youngest son. Michelle had come home from work one day back in 2012 and saw her youngest son playing with dolls in a sexual way. She asked her son had anyone ever done that to him, and he had said yes, his brother Steven. Michelle said that she went upstairs to confront Steven and that Steven did admit that he sexually assaulted his brother. So Michelle began punching and kicking him and put a bag over his head until he lost consciousness. Michelle also admits to abusing him further and making him lose consciousness again. After 2 weeks of torture, Steven passes away from his injuries on August 30th of 2012. That's when Michelle Blair put the body of her son, Steven, in her deep freezer. Just 9 months after the murder of Steven, Michelle finds out that her daughter, 13-year-old Stoney, was also sexually assaulting her youngest son. So Michelle began starving Stoney and beating her until she passed away on May of 2013. She then put Stoney's body on top of Steven's in the deep freezer and went on living like nothing even happened. Steven and Stoney were in the deep freezer for almost 3 years. While in court, Michelle tells the judge that she feels no remorse for what she did, that the children felt no remorse for what they did to her son, and that she would do it again. Michelle Blair does plead guilty to 2 counts of murder and is now serving a life sentence.
Have you guys heard about this crazy incest case between father and daughter? In 1995, 20-year-old Stephen Plato met 15-year-old Alyssa Gracia, and they both ended up having a child, a baby girl named Denise. When they had Denise, they began to struggle financially, and Alyssa also noticed that Stephen began physically abusing their daughter. So she decided that it would be best that they give her up for adoption. In 2016, Denise is all grown up. She's 18 years old, and now her name is Katie. She decided that she wanted to locate her biological parents, Stephen and Alyssa, and she actually began to live with them. When Katie moved in with her biological parents, Alyssa noticed that Stephen started acting very different, and also he began to dress a lot better, and she just thought it was really weird. In 2017, Katie got pregnant, and guess who the father was? Her own father. 2 months after Stephen and Alyssa's divorce was finalized, Katie and Stephen got married. When they gave birth to their baby boy, they were then arrested and were charged for incest, and later on they were set free on bond. In 2018, Katie began to see a different side of Stephen, so she decided to end the relationship. What happened after is devastating. Stephen took their newborn baby, he suffocated him and then put him in a closet, and then he shot and killed Katie and her adoptive dad, and then he turned the gun on himself.
Gone girl, gone wrong.
This is the case of Sherri Papini. On November 2nd, 2016, 34-year-old Sherri Papini, a wife and mom of 2 kids, vanished in broad daylight. It seemed to have been an abduction while she was out on a run near her home in Redding, California. Her family, police, and community searched everywhere. Her husband tracked her phone via Find a Phone app and found it on the side of a road with strands of her hair. They feared the worst. Missing signs, searches, California and the states surrounding it were being searched high and low for Sherri. This was major media attention. That was until Thanksgiving Day, November 24th, 3 weeks after she had gone missing, Sherri reappeared on the side of a highway. She's seen here on video footage. She was found with a bag over her head, a broken nose, hair cut off, and was chained at the waist and wrist 140 miles away from her home. She had also been branded on her right shoulder. Sherri said she was kidnapped by 2 Hispanic women with a handgun and a dark-colored SUV, even going into detail about their appearance for a police sketch. She said she suffered reported beatings while being held captive. When police asked her what the kidnapper's motive was or why they released her, she didn't know. Sherri's husband and family were relieved that she was home, but law enforcement began having doubts about her uncorroborated kidnapping. One day, the sheriff's office received a phone call from a man who told them that Sherri was actually with him the entire 22-day period she was supposedly being held captive. He said, basically, that it was a hoax. This man was supposedly an ex-boyfriend of hers. According to the DOJ, evidence found that Sherri fabricated the entire ordeal, even going as far to harming herself to make her story more believable. On March 3, 2022, Sherri was arrested on charges of making false statements to federal law enforcement officers and mail fraud. To make things even worse, from 2017 to 2021, Sherri received $300,000 from the California Victims' Compensation Board. Sherri is now in custody and is considered a flight risk. What do we think?
Today we are talking about Dorothy Jane Scott. Early in 1980, Dorothy Jane Scott began receiving threatening phone calls at work. She was a single mother of a toddler who didn't think much of the calls at first until one night when the sinister voice over the phone told her to look outside. A single dead rose was laying on the windshield of her car. The stalker who had gotten a hold of her number would go between professing his love for her and threatening bodily harm to her. Dorothy mentioned to several family members and friends that the voice over the phone sounded familiar, but she couldn't quite place who he was. She never got a chance to find out. One night at a staff meeting, Dorothy noticed one of her coworkers looked ill. She and another colleague drove the man to a nearby hospital. The doctor said he had a nasty spider bite and needed a prescription. While the 2 coworkers were waiting for the prescription to be filled, Dorothy went out to the parking lot to get her car. It was the last time she was seen alive. Her coworkers testified that after she did not return, they went out to meet her in the parking lot. At that moment, they saw her car speeding away, so they assumed there was an emergency with her son. Dorothy never returned home to her son, nor did anyone hear from her again. 4 years later, her charred bones were found at a construction site. Adding another layer of mystery to the case is the fact that a set of dog bones was found right next to her remains. Although people on the internet are still discussing the case today, no one was ever convicted or held in suspicion, and the mysterious caller was never found. That is the case of Dorothy Jane Scott.
Last known pictures of people before they went missing, Part 1. Pictured here is journalist Kim Wall after she boarded a submarine with the intent of interviewing its owner, Peter Madsen. Peter is the other person standing in the picture with her, and after this picture was taken, she disappeared. Days later, Kim's torso would wash up on shore with 15 stab wounds. Over the next couple months, 2 plastic bags would wash up containing Kim's head, legs, clothes, and a knife. Soon after, a saw would also be found. Within the next month, her arms would also be found. It was soon revealed that Peter had tortured and dismembered her and threw her body out in the sea. He was sentenced to life in prison.
A young woman in Malaysia was this close to being saved on 2 different occasions, but she would still end up dead. Hello, true crimers. This is the case of Kenny Ong. Viewer discretion is advised. Kenny was born on July 18th, 1974 in Malaysia. Now, eventually she would end up going to school in Hawaii, and she met her future husband, Brandon, in Los Angeles. Now, in June of 2003, Kenny's father was unfortunately going through cancer. So she and her husband flew out to Malaysia to be with him. So they were there for a few weeks, and her father's condition was actually improving. So the plan then was to fly back to Hawaii on June 14th, 2003. The night before, on June 13th, 2003, her and some family and some friends all went out to dinner. And this was in Kuala Lumpur. When they were done, Kenny had her mother and sister wait outside the restaurant while she went down to the car park to pick up the vehicle. A process that should have taken just a couple of minutes, but after 20 minutes, she never came back up. Her family obviously became worried. They tried calling her phone, but no one answered. So they went down to the car park to see what was going on, and the vehicle, a purple Proton Tiara, was missing. And Kenny was also missing. So the family and friends immediately went to police, and they were able to get CCTV footage of the car park. They picked up this image. They also found images of Kenny. What the footage showed was Kenny being abducted by a stranger, by this man right here. The next day, June 14th, 2003, sometime around noon, police noticed the Proton Tiara, and they approached it. And inside was Kenny Ong, and she was still alive. And in the vehicle with her was this man, later identified as Ahmad Najib Aris. Police asked them both for their IDs, and they both obliged. Kenny appeared to be giving some hand gestures towards the police, like, hey, help me. But they weren't picking up on the signals. So when police went back to the car to check the IDs, Ahmad sped off, and the police shot at the vehicle. A few hours later, another witness saw the Proton Tiara with Kenny Ong, again still alive. Again, gesturing towards this witness to please help, but before the witness was able to do anything, the man, Ahmad, sped off again. Sometime between 1 a.m. and 5 a.m. under a bridge under construction, Ahmad sexually assaulted Kenny and then stabbed her to death. Kenny's burned remains would be found later in a hole under that same bridge, and the car was found abandoned. Due to the amount of witnesses that saw him, Ahmad was arrested and charged with the murder. He was convicted and sentenced to death, and he was hanged in 2013.
This is Randy Stair, aka Andrew Blaze. He was a YouTuber and he had a really big audience. His channel started out funny and entertaining, but his subscribers quickly watched him go down a steep decline in his mental health and grasp on reality. During this decline, he spoke very openly about his idolization of the Columbine shooters and his desire to want to be with a cartoon character romantically. He then went on to document his plan to commit a mass murder, and his subscribers did absolutely nothing to help him or stop this mass murder from happening. Randy was 24 years old at the time, and he was working at a supermarket, which he worked at for the past 7 years. And he lived in Pennsylvania. Pretty shortly before the mass murders took place, Randy was working on a fan fiction video series called Ember's Ghost Squad. It was inspired by the cartoon character Ember McLean that was from the Nickelodeon TV series Danny Phantom. And Randy greatly identified with Ember. And in one of his last vlog posts, he claimed that Ember wanted him to murder because her ghost squad needed more souls. On Ember's Ghost Squad, Randy took the persona of Andrew Blaze, which was a character he made that was actually a female despite the masculine name, which was a manifestation of Randy's gender dysmorphia. Randy also admitted in one of his YouTube videos that he enjoyed cross-dressing and would love to undergo a sex change. But on the other hand, in his journal, he's writing that he is a racist and a homophobic. But in his final and last video, he states that he is just a female trapped in a male's body, and that the girl in him is clawing to get out. Randy was never officially diagnosed with anything, but there is huge speculation that he had some type of mental disorder. And he even went as far as going out and buying the same outfit that one of the Columbine shooters wore the day of the shooting. Just a couple weeks before the murder, Randy takes his camera and videotapes his entire supermarket and shows all his fans where the murder is going to take place. June 7th of 2017, at approximately 10:52, Randy arrives for his scheduled shift at the supermarket. Randy had worked the overnight shifts for the past 7 years. And I'm going to need a part 2, so like and follow, and I will post it immediately after this. Part 2 of Randy Stair, aka Andrew Blaze. We left off with it being the night of the mass murder. Randy has arrived at his shift at the supermarket that he works at. It is about 10:52 p.m. Randy begins doing his normal work. He's stocking shelves, cleaning, and doing everything that he normally does. And then he stops what he's doing and begins to block all of the emergency exits in the supermarket. He had barricaded all the exits with wooden pallets. His 4 co-workers that were working that evening were Kristen Newell, Victoria Brong, Brian Hayes, and Terry Lee Sterling. After Randy's done barricading all the emergency exits, he begins tweeting a goodbye and farewell to all of his fans, and he also starts tweeting out links to videos that he had recorded over the past several years. It's almost midnight now, and Randy goes to his car and texts his mom and tells her where to find a journal that has all the planning of the events that are about to take place. He also tells his mom what he wants her to do with his remains once he is found dead. Randy then puts on black eyeliner and black lipstick to resemble his favorite cartoon character, Ember, from Danny Phantom. He then retrieves a duffel bag in his vehicle that has 2 shotguns and ammunition. Randy then enters the supermarket and begins opening fire. He finds Victoria first. She's standing in the grocery aisle. He shoots her twice. Kristen is in the same aisle, but she had headphones on, so the gunshots were muffled. But she did look over and saw Randy standing over Victoria, and he began to shoot her 2 more times. For some reason, Randy decided to spare Kristen, and he makes his way over to the next aisle where Terry was. He shoots him twice in the back. Kristen runs over to Victoria, and even though Victoria is badly bleeding, she still has a heartbeat. Kristen then calls 911. While on the phone with 911, Kristen manages to force the pallets off of the exits and get out of the store safely. Back inside the store, Randy then goes to the bakery aisle and finds Brian, and he shoots him 5 times. Randy then realizes that Kristen got out successfully, and he decides to just walk around and shoot random objects in the store, including some propane tanks. He was hoping that they would explode, but since they didn't, he walks back to the bakery aisle, puts the gun in his mouth, and shoots himself. Unfortunately, Victoria, Brian, and Terry were all killed that night. And Kristen is the only one who survived.